The air in the scrapyard hung thick and metallic, smelling of rust, grease, and finality. Beatrice Thorne Finch breathed it in like a perfume of victory. Before her, a mechanical claw, a monstrous metal hand, descended upon the faded, seafoam green shell of a 1968 Ford Mustang. It was, in her opinion, the last and most stubborn relic of her husband's pathetic sentimentality, a four-wheeled testament to his lack of ambition. The car, Alistair's pride and joy, was an eyesore that had occupied a pristine bay of their three-car garage for the entire 6 years of their marriage, a constant, silent rebuke to the life of sleek, modern luxury she craved. The scrapyard owner, a man named Gus, with hands permanently stained with oil, had looked at her, then at the car, with a flicker of confusion. "You sure about this, ma'am? This is a classic. The body's in decent shape. You could get a few thousand from a collector. Easy." Beatrice had waved a dismissive hand, the diamonds on her wedding band glinting with cold fire. "It doesn't run. It's a heap of junk. My husband is just too attached to let it go. I'm doing him a favor, really, a surprise cleaning." She smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just give me the cash for the scrap weight. I want it gone today." Gus shrugged, the confusion replaced by the simple calculus of business. He paid her $475. She had haggled him up from $450. The crisp bills in her purse felt like a declaration of independence. Now she watched as the claw bit into the roof of the Mustang. The metal groaned, a long, mournful sound of protest, before crumpling with a sickening finality. The windows shattered, cascading like frozen tears onto the dusty ground. Each crunch, each screech of tortured steel was music to her ears. It was the sound of progress. It was the sound of her taking control of their life, a life Alistair seemed content to let stagnate in a pool of quiet mediocrity. Her husband, Alistair, was away on another of his business trips. He called himself a logistics consultant, a vague and unimpressive title that, as far as she could tell, involved him flying to dreary port cities to stare at shipping containers for days on end. He always returned smelling faintly of salt and diesel, with a tired look in his eyes that she mistook for the weariness of failure. He never brought back lavish gifts, only small, thoughtful trinkets, a piece of sea glass, a locally bound book, things that cost nothing and meant, to her, even less. She thought of him now, probably sitting in some drab airport hotel, poring over spreadsheets for his modest salary. He had no idea that back home, she was finally making a real executive decision. He thought their finances were tight, that they had to be careful. He didn't know that his carefulness felt like a cage to her. Within a few hours, the last symbol of his stagnant past would be a compressed cube of worthless metal. And with the money, she would buy something beautiful, something that declared to the world that she was not, in fact, married to a failure. What Beatrice didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that her husband was not in a drab hotel. At that very moment, he was standing on the bridge of the Titan, a vessel the size of a city block, one of 300 in the world's largest privately owned shipping fleet. He was not a consultant. He was the fleet's sole, silent owner. The pointless trip was the final stage of a corporate acquisition so massive it would shift the global balance of maritime trade. The man she believed earned a pittance was Alistair Finch, the reclusive, press-shy magnate of Finch Maritime Group, with a personal net worth of $63 billion. And the car she had just sold for scrap money was not just a car. It was a promise, a memory, and the one thing in the world he could never, ever replace. The destruction of that car would set off a chain of events that would unravel not just her life, but the lives of everyone who had ever looked at Alistair Finch and seen nothing of value. It's a story about how the things we value define who we are, and how easily we can be blinded by the wrong priorities. I find stories like this so powerful, and I'm guessing you do too. If you enjoy watching arrogance meet its match and seeing true worth revealed, Do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring more of these stories to you. And just out of curiosity, where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. Now, let's get back to the moment it all began to unravel. The roots of Beatrice's decision had been planted long ago, watered daily by the quiet condescension of her family. The Thorne family, her father Marcus and her older brother Julian, operated under the grand delusion that their names still carried the weight it had 2 generations prior. They ran a boutique import-export business, Thorne and Sons, that was bleeding money, a fact they skillfully hid behind a facade of country club memberships and new European sedans leased on disastrous terms. To them, Alistair was not just a disappointment, he was a personal affront. A dinner party 3 months earlier had been a masterclass in their particular brand of cruelty. It was held at her parents' sprawling but slightly faded home, the kind of place where the silver was real, but the plumbing was questionable. Alistair, as always, was polite, quiet, and observant. He listened more than he spoke, a quality the Thornes interpreted as a lack of intelligence. "So, Alistair," Marcus had begun, swirling a glass of red wine that cost more than Alistair's entire suit. "Julian tells me you were in Antwerp last week. Anything exciting? Or just more boxes?" He said the word boxes as if it were a contagion. "It was productive," Alistair replied, his voice calm and even. "Finalizing a new routing algorithm for perishable goods. It should reduce spoilage by about 15%. Julian laughed, a short barking sound. "An algorithm for bananas, eh? Riveting stuff. Meanwhile, I'm closing a deal for artisanal olive oil from a single estate in Tuscany. It's about heritage, you see. Passion, not just efficiency." Beatrice had shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She wished Alistair would defend himself, would invent some grand project or exaggerate his importance. But he never did. He simply met Julian's smug gaze and said, "Efficiency is its own form of passion. It's the difference between a family eating fresh fruit or throwing it away." This was typical Alistair. He would offer these small, profound truths that the Thornes were incapable of grasping. They saw it as weakness, a failure to play their game of status and bravado. "Speaking of things being thrown away," Julian continued, turning his attack with practiced ease, "are you ever going to get rid of that ghastly green thing in your garage? I saw it when I dropped Beatrice home the other day. Honestly, Alistair, it's an embarrassment. What must the neighbors think?" Alistair's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. His hand rested on his water glass, his knuckles white. "The Mustang stays, Julian." "But why?" Beatrice had chimed in, her voice pleading. She was mortified. "It's a wreck. It takes up so much space. We could use that bay for a proper home gym." Alistair turned his eyes to her, and for a moment the placid surface of his demeanor was disturbed. She saw a flicker of deep hurt, a profound disappointment that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "That car was my father's," he said, his voice low and steady, intended for her alone, though the others leaned in to listen. "He was a mechanic. He bought it brand new in 1968, the year he opened his own garage. It was the culmination of his life's dream. He was going to restore it with me when he retired." Marcus scoffed into his napkin. "A mechanic's dream. How quaint. But Beatrice is your wife now, Alistair. Her dreams should matter too. And I assure you she is not dreaming of grease-stained concrete and rusting auto parts." Alistair did not look at Marcus. He kept his gaze on Beatrice, a silent question in his eyes. "Will you defend me? Will you defend us?" She looked away, focusing on rearranging the tines of her fork on her plate. Her silence was his answer. It was a betrayal sharper than any of her family's insults. The conversation moved on, but the wound remained. For Alistair, the car was a sanctuary. It was the last tangible link to his father, Daniel Finch, a man of quiet dignity and immense skill. Daniel had taught him that the value of a thing was not in its price, but in the honesty of the work that went into it. After his father's sudden death, a 16-year-old Alistair had inherited the car and the small garage. He spent the next 5 years meticulously restoring it, not to showroom perfection, but to a state of rugged, reliable beauty. Every polished piece of chrome, every tuned part of the engine, was a conversation with his father's memory. Driving it wasn't about showing off, it was about remembering where he came from. It was the anchor that kept him grounded as his own fortunes grew to an unimaginable scale. He had built his empire on the principles his father taught him in that garage: integrity, precision, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. To Beatrice, however, the car was a monument to a past she wanted to erase. It was the physical embodiment of the simple, working-class background Alistair had come from, a background she had tried to overlook when she married him. She had been drawn to his kindness, his steady presence, a calm port in the storm of her family's endless drama. She had assumed his quiet nature was a blank canvas onto which she could paint her ambitions. She thought she could mold him, inspire him to climb the corporate ladder, to want the things she wanted. 6 years later, he was still the same calm, steady, and in her eyes, profoundly unambitious man. The car was proof that he would never change. It had to go. The $475 from the scrapyard felt heavy and righteous in her purse. 2 days after the car was destroyed, Beatrice walked into a high-end boutique, a place she usually only window shopped, and bought a leather handbag that cost nearly $2,000. She put the scrap money down as a deposit and charged the rest to a credit card Alistair had insisted they keep for emergencies only. Holding the bag, the scent of expensive, treated leather filling her senses, she felt a thrill of power. This was the life she was supposed to be living. This was a tangible result. Alistair's dusty memories had been transmuted into something beautiful, something valuable. That evening, her father and brother came over for drinks, a small celebration of her decisiveness. They sat in the manicured backyard, a space Alistair maintained with quiet pride, and toasted her with expensive scotch that Marcus had brought. "I'm proud of you, B," Julian said, raising his glass. "You finally took the bull by the horns. That man needed a push. Sometimes you have to drag them into the 21st century. It's about showing him what's possible," Marcus added, his voice smooth and paternal. "He's a simple man, Alistair. He doesn't have our vision. But if you lead, he might just learn to follow. He needs to see what a real asset looks like." The conversation inevitably turned to their own business. "The shipping costs are killing us," Julian complained, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "These big conglomerates are squeezing out the little guy. We can't get a decent rate to save our lives." "We just need a small capital injection," Marcus said, looking pointedly at Beatrice. "Just to tide us over, secure a new contract. If Alistair would just be willing to invest some of his savings, think of it as an investment in the family, in your future." Beatrice sighed. "He keeps his finances so close to the chest. He says we're saving for a house, but it feels like we're saving for retirement in a bunker. He doesn't understand that you have to spend money to make money." "Well," Marcus said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "perhaps this is the moment. You've shown you can be strong. When he gets back, you sit him down. You tell him it's time for him to step up, to be a real partner, not just to you, but to this family." The thought sent another thrill through her. Yes, that was the next step. First the car, then the finances. She was remodeling their life and her husband, piece by piece. Thousands of miles away in the silent, state-of-the-art command center of the Finch Sovereign, Alistair Finch stood before a wall of monitors displaying the real-time positions of his global fleet. The air was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the humid sea air outside. His team, a collection of the sharpest minds in maritime logistics, stood at their stations, their faces illuminated by the glow of the data streams. "Status report, Ms. Vance," Alistair said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that was absolute. Elena Vance, his chief operating officer, a woman with a mind like a steel trap and unwavering loyalty, stepped forward. "The Poseidon Group board has voted to accept our final offer, Mr. Finch. The acquisition is complete. All regulatory hurdles have been cleared. We are now the undisputed global leader in refrigerated shipping." A quiet murmur of satisfaction went through the room. This was the culmination of 2 years of meticulous planning and aggressive negotiation. It was a deal worth $12 billion, a move that would future-proof Finch Maritime for the next half-century. "Excellent," Alistair said with a simple nod. He trusted his team implicitly. He had built this empire not through bluster or bravado, but by finding the best people and empowering them to do their best work. He looked out through the reinforced glass of the bridge at the endless expanse of the ocean. It was his kingdom, a world of disciplined movement, of purpose, of getting things from where they were to where they needed to be. It was a passion for efficiency writ large upon the globe. Later that night in his private quarters, a suite more akin to a luxury penthouse than a ship's cabin, he sat by the window, a simple mug of tea in his hands. He wasn't thinking about the $12 billion deal. He was thinking about the oil stain on the floor of his garage back home. He was thinking about the scent of leather and gasoline, and the memory of his father's calloused hand guiding his own on a wrench. He loved Beatrice. He truly did. He had seen a fire in her, a spirit that he thought complemented his own quiet nature. He had chosen to keep his wealth a secret because he wanted to be loved for who he was, not what he had. He wanted a normal life, a real partnership, built on trust and mutual respect, not on the distorting prism of immense fortune. He had hoped that, over time, she would come to see the value in a simple, authentic life, away from the poisonous influence of her family's superficial ambitions. But he wasn't a fool. He knew the pressure she was under. He had felt her growing dissatisfaction like a change in the barometric pressure. He knew a storm was coming. He just didn't know it had already made landfall. He took a sip of his tea, the warmth doing little to quell the cold knot of apprehension in his stomach. The trip was over. It was time to go home and face the weather. The flight home was long, crossing 10 time zones. Alistair used the time not to sleep, but to think. He sat in the private jet that was a subsidiary of his corporation, a convenience he used sparingly and which Beatrice knew nothing about, believing he flew commercial, and stared out at the blanket of clouds below. He was a man who controlled a global network of immense complexity, a strategist who thought 10 moves ahead in the chess game of international commerce. Now he was applying that same focus to his own life. He knew something was wrong. Beatrice's texts had been brief, almost clipped. When he'd called, she'd sounded distant, her voice brittle with a forced cheerfulness that set his teeth on edge. He had learned to read the subtle weather patterns of his wife's moods, and the forecast was poor. When the car dropped him at the end of their quiet suburban street, he walked the last 100 yards, a habit he'd formed to decompress, to transition from the titan of industry back to just Alistair, the husband. The house looked perfect, as always. Beatrice was meticulous about appearances. The lawn was edged, the flower beds free of weeds. But as he approached, a sense of deep unease settled over him. It was the garage door. It was closed, which was unusual. He always left it open when he was working on the car, and Beatrice rarely bothered to close it. He entered through the front door. The house was silent. A new handbag, a brand he knew was astronomically expensive, sat on the polished entryway table as if it were a piece of art on display. He noted it, filed it away, and continued his path. He walked through the pristine kitchen and opened the interior door to the garage. The sterile, chemical scent of a freshly epoxied floor hit him first. The garage was unnaturally clean, unnervingly empty. The bay on the right, where the Mustang had rested for 6 years, was a void. The familiar, hulking shape was gone. The scattered tools, the cans of wax, the neatly coiled extension cords, all gone. All that remained was a faint, ghostly outline on the new great floor, a shadow of what had once been. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. A profound and chilling stillness descended upon him. It was the quiet of a deep-sea trench, a place of immense pressure in absolute silence. He walked to the center of the empty bay and crouched down, his fingers lightly touching the smooth, cold epoxy. He could still feel it there, the memory of the car, the weight of it. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was 16 again, covered in grease, his father's voice guiding him, patient and kind. "Easy now, son. Don't force it. Feel the machine. Listen to what it needs." He had listened. He had always listened. But he had failed to hear the grinding gears of his own marriage. "So you're back." Beatrice's voice came from the doorway. He opened his eyes and stood up slowly, turning to face her. She was dressed impeccably, her arms crossed over her chest, a look of defiant resolve on her face. She was preparing for a fight, girding herself for his anger. "I'm back," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of accusation. It was that very quietness that seemed to unnerve her. "How was your trip?" she asked, the question of formality, a placeholder for the real conversation. "Productive," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Tiring." He gestured with a subtle nod to the empty space. "You've been busy too." This was it, the opening she had rehearsed. She took a deep breath, stepping fully into the garage, her heels clicking sharply on the new floor. "I have. I did something for us, Alistair, for our future." "You cleaned the garage," he stated. It was not a question. "I did more than that," she said, her chin lifting. "I got rid of it. The junk, that old car, it's gone." She watched his face, searching for the explosion she expected. When it didn't come, she pressed on, her words tumbling out in a well-practiced cascade. "Don't be angry. Please, just listen. That thing, it was holding us back. It was a symbol of the past. I did it so we could finally move forward. I even had the floor professionally sealed. It's a clean slate. For us." Alistair remained silent, his stillness a heavy blanket in the room. He simply watched her, his gaze analytical, as if he were observing a complex system he was trying to understand. His lack of a predictable, emotional response was throwing her off balance. She needed his anger to fuel her own righteousness. "Say something," she demanded, her voice rising slightly. "I see you bought a new handbag," he said, his tone conversational. The non sequitur caught her by surprise. "What?" "Yes, I treated myself. With the money from the scrapyard, I got nearly $500 for it. Can you believe it? For that heap of rust?" $500, he repeated, the words flat, hollowed out of all meaning. He took a step towards her, and she flinched, finally seeing something in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something far colder, far deeper. It was a look of assessment, of finality. Just then, the sound of a car door slamming came from the driveway. A moment later, Marcus and Julian walked into the garage as if on cue. "Beatrice, we were just passing by, thought we'd—" Julian began, his voice booming with false joviality before trailing off as he took in the scene. The tension in the garage was thick enough to taste. "Ah, Alistair, you're back," Marcus said, recovering more quickly. He placed a proprietary hand on Beatrice's shoulder. "I hope my daughter has explained her excellent decision. It's a bold move, my boy, but the right one. The absolute right one." The ambush was now complete. The three of them stood together, a united front, ready to deliver the final verdict on his failures. Beatrice, emboldened by the arrival of her family, took her father's cue. She stepped forward, her voice now firm, infused with the conviction of her rehearsed speech. "Alistair, we need to talk. Not just about the car, about everything. This isn't working." Alistair looked from her to her father, then to her brother. He saw the coordinated effort, the planned attack. He had faced down corporate raiders and hostile governments with less orchestration. A strange sense of calm settled over him. The worst had happened. The rest was just fallout. "Go on," he said softly. "I'm listening." "This life," she began, gesturing around the pristine garage, "it's not enough. It's not what I envisioned for myself. For us. I married you because I saw potential, Alistair. But you've done nothing with it. You're content. You're stagnant. You work a dead-end job for a mediocre salary," Julian chimed in, stepping forward to stand beside his sister. He had been waiting for this moment for years. "You have no ambition, no drive. You spend your weekends tinkering with that old piece of junk instead of networking, climbing the ladder, making something of yourself." "Your wife deserves more," Marcus added, his voice dripping with paternalistic disappointment. "She deserves a man who can provide for her, who can give her the world. Instead, you give her this." He swept his arm, indicating the comfortable, upper-middle-class home, as if it were a hovel. "You cling to the past, to your father's sentimental rubbish, while the future is passing you by. Beatrice had to take action because you are incapable of it. She did what a real partner does. She made the hard decision you were too weak to make." They continued in this vein for several minutes, a tag team of accusations, a meticulously compiled list of his perceived inadequacies. They spoke of his simple clothes, his lack of interest in social climbing, his quiet nature, which they labeled as passivity. They painted a portrait of him as a failed man, a weight holding their precious Beatrice down. Through it all, Alistair remained motionless, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He listened with an unnerving patience, his eyes focused on a point on the far wall. He let them empty their chambers, exhaust their ammunition. He let the full measure of their disdain, their pity, their profound misunderstanding of who he was, wash over him. He was a sea cliff, and their words were the waves, loud and furious, but ultimately powerless against the stone beneath. When they finally fell silent, the echo of their vitriol hung in the air. The three of them stood, flushed and breathing heavily, confident in their victory. They had laid bare the truth as they saw it, and he had offered no defense. They mistook his silence for admission, his stillness for defeat. Then he moved. He lowered his hands and looked at each of them in turn. His gaze was not one of a defeated man. It was clear, piercing, and utterly devoid of fear. "Are you finished?" he asked, his voice still quiet, yet it seemed to dominate the space. Julian scoffed. "I think we've made our point." "You've made several," Alistair agreed, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Let's address them. You believe my job is mediocre, my ambition lacking, and my primary fault is a sentimental attachment to an old car." He paused, letting the summary hang in the air. "Let's start with the car. You said you got $500 for it." $475 to be exact, Beatrice said, a note of pride in her voice. "I'm a good negotiator." "I see," Alistair said. He looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes was so intense, she felt a shiver trace its way down her spine. "It's a pity you didn't negotiate with Mr. Dubois in Geneva. He's a private collector. His standing offer for the car, which I turned down last month, was $12 million. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical thing, pressing in on them, sucking the air from their lungs. $12 million. The words seemed to hang in the garage, impossible and absurd. Julian was the first to break, a strangled laugh escaping his lips. $12 million? For that heap? You're delusional, Alistair. You're making things up to save face." "Am I?" Alistair's voice was dangerously soft. It was one of 3 prototypes for the '68 Shelby GT 500 KR. The engine was hand-built by Carroll Shelby himself. My father was his apprentice for a summer. Shelby gave it to him as a gift when he opened his own shop. There are documents, of course, a full provenance, but I imagine they were in the glove compartment, which is now likely a compressed cube of metal. Beatrice's face had gone white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. The man she thought she knew, the simple, sentimental man, was talking about numbers and names that meant nothing to her but carried the undeniable ring of truth. "You're lying," Marcus hissed, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "You're a fantasist." As if on cue, the doorbell rang, its cheerful chime a jarring intrusion. Alistair didn't even turn his head. "That will be for me," he said calmly. "Beatrice, would you mind?" Numbly, as if in a trance, Beatrice walked out of the garage and through the house. A moment later, she returned, followed by a woman in a sharply tailored charcoal suit. The woman was the epitome of corporate power, her expression calm and professional, her eyes sharp. She carried a slim leather briefcase. She stopped just inside the garage and nodded respectfully to Alistair. "Mr. Finch, I hope I'm not interrupting." Marcus and Julian stared, their mouths agape. "Mr. Finch?" "Not at all, Miss Vance," Alistair said. "You're right on time. My wife, Beatrice, her father, Marcus Thorne, and her brother, Julian." Elena Vance gave them a brief, dismissive nod. "A pleasure." Her focus returned immediately to Alistair. "The final signatures are ready for the Poseidon merger, sir. The press release is scheduled for 800 tomorrow. I have the documents here if you'd like to review them one last time." The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow against the foundation of the Thorns' reality. "Poseidon? Merger?" Julian stammered, the name of the colossal shipping firm familiar even to him. "What are you talking about?" Alistair looked at Elena. "I believe my family is under some misapprehensions about the nature of my work. Perhaps you could clarify." Elena's expression didn't change, but her eyes held a glint of what might have been satisfaction. She was a gatekeeper who had watched these people disrespect her boss for years, and now she was being given the key to the gate. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "Alistair Finch is the founder, chairman, and sole shareholder of the Finch Maritime Group. We are a global logistics and shipping conglomerate with assets in excess of $50 billion. The Poseidon acquisition, which Mr. Finch finalized yesterday, brings our total valuation to approximately $63 billion. Mr. Finch prefers to maintain a low public profile for security and personal reasons. He is not a logistics consultant. He is, for all practical purposes, global logistics." The garage was silent save for the sound of Beatrice's sharp, ragged intake of breath. She swayed on her feet, one hand flying to her mouth. 63 billion. The number was incomprehensible. It was an astronomical figure, a joke, a fantasy. But the woman in the suit, her powerful presence, the deference she showed Alistair, it was all terrifyingly real. Elena Vance, at a subtle nod from Alistair, opened her briefcase. She produced a slim file. "Regarding the vehicle," she said, her voice clinical, "this is a copy of the notarized offer from the Dubois collection in Geneva, dated last month. $12 million, as Mr. Finch stated." She slid the paper onto a nearby workbench. It landed with a soft, damning whisper. She then produced another document, a thick one bound in blue. "And these are the final papers for the Poseidon deal. The purchase price and signatory lines are clearly marked." She placed it next to the first document. The papers sat there, two pieces of irrefutable proof that shattered their world. Marcus Thorne's face was the color of ash. He looked from the documents to Alistair, his eyes wide with a terrifying cocktail of emotions: awe, fear, and a desperate, sickening greed. Julian was staring at Alistair as if he were an alien who had just taken off a human mask. He kept mouthing the word billion, but no sound emerged. Beatrice finally found her voice. It was a broken, trembling whisper. "Alistair, why? Why didn't you tell me?" Alistair turned his full attention to her. The coldness was gone, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. "I wanted a wife, Beatrice, not a chief financial officer. I wanted someone who would love me Alistair, the man who likes to work on his father's car. Not Mr. Finch, the man who can buy anything he wants. I wanted a partner who valued integrity and character, not a balance sheet. I gave you 6 years to show me who you were. Today you did. His words were not angry. They were simply a statement of fact, a final assessment delivered with the quiet authority of a judge handing down a sentence. The reversal of fortune was complete and absolute. The man they had mocked, the man they had pitied and tried to control, was revealed to be a king. And they, in their arrogance and blindness, had just thrown away his crown jewel for the price of scrap metal. Beatrice sank to her knees on the cold, newly sealed floor of the garage, the $2,000 handbag slipping from her grasp and landing with a soft thud. It looked cheap and ridiculous in the face of the truth. The immediate aftermath was a symphony of pathetic, desperate sounds. Julian began to stammer, a string of incoherent apologies about a terrible misunderstanding. Marcus, his face slick with sweat, took a stumbling step forward, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. Alistair, son, we had no idea. My God, this is magnificent. We can fix this. It's just a car. A car can be replaced. Alistair looked at the older man, his expression unyielding. No, Marcus, it cannot. You still don't understand. It was never about the money. It was about the promise I made to my father. It was about the one piece of him I had left. He then turned his gaze to Beatrice, who was still on the floor, weeping silently. And you didn't sell a car. You sold a memory. You sold my trust. You took the most sacred thing I had, the story of who I am, and you sold it for the price of a handbag. His voice, though still quiet, cut through their panic babbling like a surgeon's scalpel. He wasn't shouting, and that made it so much worse. This wasn't a rage that would pass. This was a fundamental shift, a tectonic realignment of their world based on a truth he had calmly, devastatingly revealed. He then turned his attention back to Marcus and Julian, his eyes hardening. Let's talk about your ambition, your vision. He walked over to the workbench where Elena had placed the documents. He ignored them and picked up a simple clipboard that he kept for his own notes. Thorne and Sons Imports, established 1958, a respectable business once. Now it's a shell leveraged to the hilt. You have a debt-to-asset ratio of 3-to-1. Your largest creditor is about to call in your loan, a fact you've been hiding from your investors and your own daughter. Marcus and Julian froze, their faces draining of all remaining color. This was information no one outside their inner circle should have known. How do you know that? Julian whispered, horrified. I told you, Alistair said, a hint of steel in his voice. I am in the business of logistics, and logistics is, at its heart, the business of information. I know every ship, every port, every customs declaration, every bill of lading. I know that your last 3 shipments have been rejected for quality control issues. I know that your so-called Tuscan olive oil is a cheap blend from North Africa you've been fraudulently relabeling. I know everything. He paused, letting the weight of his knowledge settle upon them. And I also know that you came here today hoping to convince Beatrice to get me to invest my life savings to bail you out. You are going to use my modest, hard-earned money to plug the holes in your sinking, fraudulent ship. He looked at Elena. Ms. Vance, there was a secondary item on my agenda for this trip, wasn't there? Yes, sir, she replied, her tone perfectly neutral. The strategic acquisition of smaller, distressed import-export firms to be folded into our new grocery logistics division. Thorne and Sons was on the preliminary list for consideration. Alistair looked back at Marcus, whose jaw was now hanging slack. My acquisitions team flagged your company as a potential target. High brand recognition, historic name, but poor management. The proposal was to acquire it, clear its debts, and inject $20 million in capital to modernize its operations. It would have saved your company, your name, your legacy. He let the hope flicker in their eyes for a beat. The deal, however, was contingent on my personal character assessment of its leadership. I wanted to see if the men running the company were the kind of people Finch Maritime does business with. Honest, hard-working, men of integrity. He looked from Marcus to Julian, his gaze lingering on each of them, a silent, damning judgment. The report was due to my board this Friday, but I find I am ready to make my assessment now. He turned to Elena. Ms. Vance, please inform the acquisitions team to remove Thorne & Sons from the list, effective immediately. Furthermore, I want you to forward our internal audit of their business practices to the SEC. Anonymously, of course. Consider it done, Mr. Finch, she said, making a note on a tablet she produced from her briefcase. The finality of it was like a physical blow. Marcus staggered back, clutching his chest, his face a mask of utter ruin. Julian just stared, his mind unable to process the speed and totality of his own destruction. They had come to mock a failure and had instead been annihilated by a giant they hadn't even known existed. Finally, Alistair turned back to Beatrice. He crouched down, not to her level, but close enough that she had to look up at him. His face was a landscape of sorrow. This house is in your name. I arranged that when we bought it, he said softly. The accounts you know about, the joint savings, the checking, that money is yours. It's not much by your family's standards, but it's enough to live on for a while. I will have my personal effects moved out by the end of the day. No, Alistair, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face, her hand reaching for his arm. I love you. I didn't know. I was stupid. I was so stupid. He looked at her hand but didn't pull away. You're right, you were stupid, he said, his voice devoid of malice, just a quiet statement of truth. But it's worse than that. You were cruel. You stood by, year after year, and let your family mock me. You participated in it with your silence. You valued their opinion of me more than you valued me. You didn't love me, Beatrice. You loved the idea of what you could turn me into. And when I wouldn't change, you decided to break the things I loved. He stood up, gently disengaging her hand. The lawyers will be in touch, he said. He looked at Elena. Let's go. We have a press release to approve. He walked out of the garage without a backward glance. Elena Vance followed, closing the door softly behind them, leaving Beatrice and her family alone in the pristine, empty, and suddenly cavernous space, surrounded by the wreckage of their lives. The months that followed were a slow, grinding education in the true meaning of consequence. As Alistair had predicted, Thorne & Sons imports collapsed with breathtaking speed. The SEC investigation, prompted by the anonymous tip, uncovered years of fraud. Marcus and Julian were not just ruined financially, they were disgraced publicly, their names dragged through the mud in the business pages. They lost the house, the country club membership, and the respect of the community they had prized so highly. They were forced to sell everything to cover a fraction of their debts and legal fees, their arrogance replaced by the sour taste of humiliation. Beatrice was cast adrift. Her family, in their own misery, blamed her. You were married to him. How could you not know? Julian would shout during their rare, acrimonious phone calls. You drove him away. You ruined us. They conveniently forgot their own role, their constant pressure and condescension. In their eyes, she was the sole architect of their downfall. She was forced to sell the house. The proceeds, as Alistair had arranged, were hers. But after the debts on her credit cards, the handbag being just one of many such purchases, were paid, there was less than she expected. She moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable part of town. The silence was the loudest thing in it. She took a job working as a sales associate in a department store, a place she once would have shopped without a thought. The irony was not lost on her. She spent her days folding sweaters and assisting women who were a reflection of her former self. Women who judged value by the price tag and brand name. Each day was a lesson in humility. She learned what it was to be tired from standing for 8 hours, to be polite to rude customers, to worry about making rent. In the quiet evenings, alone in her small apartment, she began a painful but necessary process of introspection. She replayed the 6 years of her marriage, but this time she saw them through a new lens. She remembered all the times Alistair had tried to share his simple joys with her: a walk in the park, a home-cooked meal, his passion for the car. She had dismissed them all as signs of his lack of sophistication. Now she saw them for what they were: an invitation into a world of genuine, unpretentious contentment, a world she had been too blind to enter. She remembered his quiet strength, his unshakable integrity. He had never once lied to her. He had simply omitted a truth he knew she wasn't ready to handle. He had given her a test, a long, patient test of character, and she had failed it in the most spectacular way possible. The immense wealth was irrelevant. She had been married to a good man, a kind man, a man of deep and abiding principle, and she had broken his heart. She had treated him like scrap. After 3 months of this self-imposed exile, she sat down and wrote a letter. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She didn't ask for money or for a second chance. She didn't make excuses or blame her family. She simply apologized. She filled page after page with every specific cruelty, every silent betrayal, every moment of condescension. She apologized for not defending him to her father and brother. She apologized for her materialism, for her blindness, for her arrogance. Most of all, she apologized for the car, for not understanding that it was the repository of his love for his father. She wrote until she had nothing left to say, her tears staining the cheap paper. She folded it, put it in a plain envelope, and sent it to the headquarters of Finch Maritime Group, with no expectation of a reply. It was not a plea for reconciliation. It was a confession, an act of penance. The groundbreaking ceremony was a low-key affair, just as Alistair had wanted. There were no news crews, only a small gathering of community leaders and the construction team. He stood on a dusty plot of land in the heart of the working-class neighborhood where he had grown up, a cool autumn breeze ruffling his hair. Behind him, a large sign depicted an architect's rendering of the building to come, the Daniel Finch Center for Vocational Excellence. It was his passion project, a state-of-the-art facility that would offer free training in skilled trades: auto mechanics, welding, carpentry, electrical work to underprivileged youth. It was a tribute to his father and the values he had instilled in him, that honest work with one's hands had a dignity and worth that transcended any dollar amount. He looked happier and more at peace than Beatrice had ever seen him. His life was no longer compartmentalized. He was simply Alistair Finch, a man honoring his father's memory. Elena Vance approached him, holding out a single white envelope. "This arrived at the office for you, sir." It was marked personal. He recognized Beatrice's handwriting immediately. He took the letter and walked away from the small crowd, standing under the shade of an old oak tree. He read it slowly, his expression thoughtful. He read it a second time. The words were raw, honest, and stripped of all artifice. It was the first truly honest communication she had ever sent him. There was no anger left in him, only a quiet, lingering sadness for what could have been, and a flicker of hope for the person she might yet become. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. A week later, Beatrice was at her job, refolding a display of cashmere scarves, when a coworker told her a courier was asking for her at the front of the store. Her heart pounded. She walked to the entrance, and a uniformed man handed her a small, simple box. There was no return address. Back in the stockroom, her hands trembling, she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of simple cotton, was not a check, not jewelry, not any symbol of the wealth she had once craved. It was a single, ordinary-looking key. Beneath it lay a folded note, written on plain paper in Alistair's familiar, neat script. "Beatrice," it read, "thank you for your letter. My father also believed that everyone deserves a second chance. Not to go back and erase the past, but to start over and build a better future. This is for you. The key was for a clean, modest, but fully furnished apartment in a quiet, safe building, the lease paid for 1 year. Tucked beside it was a brochure for a business administration program at the local community college, with a small, handwritten note on it: "Enrollment is paid for. The rest is up to you." It was not a handout, it was a hand up. It was not a path back to him, but a path forward for herself. It was an act of grace, a final lesson in the nature of true wealth. It wasn't about giving someone a fish, or even teaching them how to fish. It was about giving them the dignity of their own boat and a map of the sea, and trusting them to learn to navigate the waters on their own. Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were not tears of self-pity or regret. They were tears of gratitude. She finally understood. True worth isn't measured by what you have in your bank account, but by the character you build in your heart. Respect, integrity, and kindness are the only currencies that truly matter. Her old life had been a gilded cage. Now, holding a simple key, she was finally, truly, free to begin. What a powerful journey of realization. It really goes to show that the most valuable things in life are often the ones that can't be bought or sold. What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Is it about humility, integrity, or the danger of judging others by appearances? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments section below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content that explores these deep human themes. Thank you for being here with us today,